Wouldn't it be nice to have several thought leaders in your industry know and love your brand? Start a podcast. Invite your industry's thought leaders to be guests on your show, and start reaping the benefits of having a network full of industry influencers. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. I'm your host for today's episode, Logan Lyles. I am joined today by Andy Paul. He is the founder of the Sales House. He is also the host of the Accelerate podcast. Andy, how are you doing today?
Logan, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
It's fantastic to have you on the show. Andy, for folks listening to this who aren't familiar with you or the Sales House, I'd love for you to give them a little bit of context before we dive into some lessons in sales that you've learned from 650 plus episodes doing your podcast. Before we dive into that, I would love for you to share a little bit about yourself and the Sales House with our audience.
Sure. Well, thank you. The Sales House is relatively recent service that we've launched, which is all-in-one, all-inclusive sales education community for business-to-business sellers. My belief built over 4 decades in sales is that there's this huge gap in how we make sellers smarter, right? And we think sales training can do it, but I think sales training falls short. I think we need to educate our sellers about really the why behind the how that they get in sales training. And so the Sales House is a place for people to come and get that information and make themselves just a little bit smarter every day about sales. And as you said, I've got a podcast called Accelerate with Andy Paul. We've released 677 episodes and focused sales, marketing, leadership, everything sort of through a sales lens, though. And we've had James on the show. And in addition to that, I've written a couple books that have done well and just enjoy helping salespeople get better at what they do.
I love it. I love digging into the why behind the how, especially for sales folks and leveling up the conversation. And like you said, bringing not only training, but education to the sales profession. So I'm really excited, Andy, to hear some of your top lessons that you've learned in talking about sales in this context on your podcast for over 670 episodes, as you mentioned. And I know the first one you wanted to talk about was, this idea that selling has actually changed less than people believe or less than we want to think. And more importantly, why is that important to sellers? Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I think that there are lots of people with vested interests in having us believe that somehow sales has undergone this wholesale change. And undoubtedly, there's been a lot of changes in terms of the technologies that we can use to assist in certain aspects of selling. But at the end of the day, sales is still about a person making a connection with another person, engaging their interest, building trust, inspiring them to take some action. And there's nothing that's changed or that has happened in terms of the development of technologies and so on that has changed that. And unfortunately, a lot of the messages that are sort of communicated these days is that somehow you can outsource this whole idea of relationship building with sales, or somehow having a relationship with your customers, your buyers, is not as essential as it was before. And I believe that the opposite is actually true, that increasingly this relationship is becoming more important, that becomes a more essential element for differentiating you from your competitors.
Is that the main reason that you believe the relationship still is as important? Because like you, I've heard these messages that, the relationship isn't as important. We're big believers in the relationship still being fundamental to any sort of business transaction. Why do you think that the relationship is becoming more important with the things that are going on today, Andy?
Well, so two parts we'll talk about. One is I think part of the reason people sort of recoil at the use of the word relationship is they misunderstand what you're talking about. And we're not talking about becoming friends with your buyer. Those sometimes that happens, but any two things that operate or connect in any way have a relationship. It could be two pieces of machinery have a relationship. I mean, just the fact that you're working with someone, there is a relationship, and that relationship has to be functional in many ways. And it's a learning relationship. It's a trust-based relationship. There's various phases it goes through. So that part's not going to change. People still rely on other humans to provide them information to help validate, in some respect, the decisions that they want to make. And this is true even as we move into an age where AI is much more central in our lives, and it's going to play more of a role in the sales process. At the end of the day, it's still a person making a decision. That decision has certain risks for the individual and the entity they work for. And they need somebody with a sense of empathy to help them validate the decision they're going to make. And machines don't have empathy. So increasingly, as machines come into the equation, you still need people to complete the transaction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we tend to make decisions emotionally and then back them up with logic as opposed to vice versa. So that's a great point there. On that vein of technology, Andy, one of the things you mentioned learning in all of your interviews and talking sales for so long on your podcast is that, technology and specifically automation-based technology haven't really had a massive impact on overall sales productivity, at least not yet. Tell me a little bit about your thoughts there.
Yeah, I mean, if you consider that productivity is not measured surely by quantity of activities that's done, I mean, certainly if you want to measure from that standpoint, yeah, I mean, a lot of sales technologies have enabled people to send more emails, dialers, and automate more calls and so on. But that's not real productivity. Productivity is, okay, how many dollars of revenue per hour of selling time am I generating? Mm-hmm. And all the data that exists, which again, it's not like we have a problem. We don't have good enough data about sales, but the data that exists suggests that actually, the technology is not changing that equation. That we're not actually producing more revenue. That we're not making per hour of selling time. Therefore, people are not individually becoming more productive in a true productive sense. And I actually look at the data. Says that, hey, you could actually draw a correlation. Not that I think it exists, but you could actually draw a correlation and say, actually, technology is having a negative impact on sales productivity. I mean, look at CSO Insights report on sales quota attainment. I think it's dropped year over year over the last 7 years, which just happens to coincide with the introduction of this sort of golden age of technology coming into sales. So my point is not that technology is bad. I think we just don't know how to use it yet. And maybe it's incomplete in some ways that I think are really important. One of which, for instance, may be that all this technology is coming to sales. It's all about the sellers. And there's very little of it that's about the buyers. So I'll have CEOs on my show that I interview, CEOs of sales technology companies, and I'll say, okay, well, how does your product help somebody make a decision? Because if you go with the assumption, which I do, and the research substantiates that what buyers are really trying to accomplish is quickly gather information to make a good decision with the least investment of their time and effort possible, then how does your sales tool help that take place?
I love the way you break that down, because that's simply what buyers want, right? They're not looking to be sold to. They're looking to make a buying decision that they can feel good about, right?
And with the least investment of their time and money possible. So that's an important part of it. So it's, how does your tool help me, the buyer, do that? So I think that's the next step we'll see with sales technology, as it really becomes buyers, not just sales enablement, but buyers enablement as well. But we're not there yet. And I wrote about, there's this law that was developed by the scientist a futurist called Roy Amara. It's called Amara's Law. And I think it's really relevant. And he said, quote, "We tend to overestimate the effect of a technology in the short run and underestimate the effect in the long run. And so I think we're still in the short run part, and it's going to continue to evolve, and it will have substantial impacts if done properly in the long run.
Mm-hmm. I think going back to your point there of productivity, the way I think about it is, there's efficiency and then there's effectiveness. A lot of tools out there make us more quote unquote efficient. Are we getting more tasks done in less time? Yes, we're making more calls, we're sending more emails. But the effectiveness, like you said, is how are we affecting the revenue, the end results that we're trying to drive, and thinking about productivity in both of those. We want to be more efficient, but a lot more efficiency doesn't really get us anywhere if we're not ultimately being effective. And on that note, Andy, you mentioned this already a little bit, that the value of building relationships and sustaining relationships and growing those relationships is important, probably more so than ever. And I think it's your opinion that will increase in value over time, that salespeople's ability to foster relationships in the selling process is going to increase in value over time. Tell us a little bit about where you see things going, in that area from here.
Yeah, well, and I touched on this a bit earlier, is that, undoubtedly, we're already seeing this. Artificial intelligence, machine learning is coming into business, it's coming into sales, and we see some sales tools out there that are already using it to analyze data and the like. But assuming that it continues to grow and its influence grows in terms of helping sales reps take care of repetitive tasks and then moving into customer engagement field, there seems to be fairly broad consensus, if you read about this, is that there's fine, the machine will take you a certain point, a certain distance, but again, the machine doesn't have empathy, right? Mm-hmm. It's one of the things that it's just not there. It doesn't mean at some point it's not going to, but it doesn't, at least not in the foreseeable future. And what buyers want is they want this validation from another human. It's part of the reason they're still salespeople. It's part of the reason, actually, research, I think it's a couple of years ago, came out from Gartner. One of the points in there was that actually buyers trust the salespeople more than the companies they work for. And I think that speaks to the role that the trusted advisor plays for a buyer. And there's research done in the medical field that says, there's all these AI-driven tools that exist that are designed to help people make critical medical decisions, medical care decisions. And what the research has shown is that patients don't want a machine to consult with to make those ultimate decisions about surgery and other, life-oriented decisions on medical care. They want to talk to a doctor. And I think we have the same phenomenon in sales. Is what is it about a decision that you make as a human that you're making to purchase something for your business? Well, it's got risk associated with it. The risk could be to you personally if it's a bad decision. It could be to the impact it has on the company if it's a bad decision. So a lot of buying and a lot of selling is really about risk mitigation. Well, I think that people one of the ways they want to mitigate risk is they want to be able to have this relationship with a trusted advisor that can help them say, okay, it's all right. This is a good decision. And the buyer, trust the seller, and I'm going to go with that recommendation.
Yeah, you can't get away from that trust aspect as we make emotional decisions. I think, tying it right back there again is a phenomenal point there, Andy. On this idea of, technology just all over the place, especially, in our sales tech stacks, one of the lessons you mentioned learning in talking to salespeople and sales leaders on your podcast for so many episodes now is, the negative impacts of overcomplicating sales, which I've seen that done a lot in sales training, but also overwhelming sales reps, which I think having too many tools, a lot of times that don't talk to each other, can be one way that sales reps can get overwhelmed, and that can affect their overall productivity. But what are some of the other negative impacts you see in either overcomplicating sales or things that are overwhelming sales reps today?
Well, you certainly touched on many of them, right? I mean, an expanding tech stack, sometimes sanctioned by the company, sometimes just individuals serve, on their own, reaching out and using more tools. There's one study that came out a year plus ago about interviewing sales ops managers, saying how many tools do you have in your tech stack, and I think they said the number was like 7 and they asked the salespeople on the floor and it was 11 or 12, right? So there's this huge disparity.
Yeah.
So in some cases, yeah, in an effort to try to just find an edge or something to help them, reps are reaching out for these easily accessible applications or tools, and that obviously is complicating the issue for them and overwhelming them. Even with the tech stacks that are being sanctioned, sometimes it's overwhelming the learning curve to use them and use them appropriately and use them in a way that affect outcomes, and that's which we talked about earlier. But I think the other thing though that's really happened is that there's sort of a natural human tendency is when we have more of these tools coming into sales is to have sort of a blind faith in what they do, and to say, okay, well, if I've got this app that we're running that's going to enable my SDRs to send out 50 emails a day and make 40 calls a day and have 5 conversations a day, then we need to use it just like that. And so you see these sales processes, so these really rigid sales processes, they're really driven by activity metrics. And you lay on top of that the responsibility for sometimes researching prospects, maybe making social touches. I mean, just sort of this range of things, personalizing emails. And yeah, you can see why it's overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And so I think that for me, what we have to do is stop, as I said, having this blind reliance or blind faith in the technology, and say, how do we use this to really optimize the capabilities of each individual on the sales team? To enable them to become the best version of themselves possible, even if they operate slightly outside this process, that quote unquote process that we spend all this time designing. And I think it's not settled science, as many people want to believe, that this is the best way to do it. And I think we're seeing some evolution already among, especially in the SaaS world, among some companies that thought, okay, we set up this one particular sales model, and actually we're finding for our business that's not the optimal way to go. And so you're seeing some companies, dramatically scale back the number of SDRs they have and really putting more of the emphasis for outbound prospecting and so on back to the account execs. Because what they're saying is, this was interesting, this model. We sort of went and did it because everybody else is doing it. But we tried it. That's not working for us. And so we need more companies to sort of say, that's not working for us. Not to say the model's bad, but companies that mm-hmm. are being thoughtful and deliberate about what their model is, what their process is, testing it, seeing what works best for the buyers, and then taking appropriate steps to really develop and cultivate the capabilities and skills of their individuals.
It's story time, and this growth story is about search engine marketing. Okay, so the story revolves around eSub, a project management SaaS company specifically for subcontractors. Even though eSub had incredible customer retention, they struggled with growth. Being a niche service, they discovered that there was little demand expressed for their solutions within search engines. To take on this challenge, eSub hired Directive Consulting, the B2B search marketing agency. After refining targeting, pre-qualifying clicks with an ad copy, and developing custom landing pages, Directive was able to increase eSub's marketing qualified leads by 71%, while decreasing their cost per lead by 65%. I have a hunch that Directive can get these kind of results for you too. So head over to directiveconsulting.com and request a totally free custom proposal. That's directiveconsulting.com. All right, let's get back to this interview.
So with all of these challenges, facing us as sellers, as sales leaders, and as you pointed there, as organizations trying to figure out, what is effective for their individual contributors and their sales teams as a whole, I have to believe that increasing investment in personal development as salespeople is going to become more important as the rise of continued relationship building is more and more important than your personal skills are going to set you apart even more than what your tech stack does, right, Andy?
Well, I think that's the case. Yeah, I mean, I first wrote about this back in 2011 with my first book, Zero Time Selling. That the trend was already evident then. Is that the first line of differentiation is the salesperson, any sort of sales and buying situation. And that hasn't changed in intervening years. In fact, I think it's going the other direction. I think it's becoming more and more important. And I think it's for several reasons. One we talked about is companies sort of rely on these sales models that are sort of based on mass outreach and purely just a numbers game, quantity over quality. Quality sticks out. So yeah, you can achieve a certain level of success doing quantity over quality, and there I think are limits to it. But in that environment, quality sticks out. So what are we doing to develop our individuals? What are we doing as an organization to truly commit to educating our sales teams about how to connect with a human being, another human being, how to, as I said before, engage their interest, how to build trust, how to inspire them, how to ask great questions, how to listen slowly without judgment to the answers you get, how to make sure that every sales touch that you have delivers value to the prospect gets a return on the time they invest in you. These are things that are not a function of rote training. It's a function of educating people, exposing them to new points of view, new perspectives. And not everybody's going to take that information and process it and implement it the same way. But the best sales teams that I've worked with, I've worked for, that I've built over my career, were a collection of individuals, not a collection of clones. And we've been going to this direction of let's turn everybody into a clone of some idealized top performer, when really, the metric of greatness is really individual for every person. We just need to enable them to reach that standard for themselves and what that represents for them. And that requires more than committing to, hey, hire somebody like Andy and come in and give a keynote sales address once a year at our kickoff meeting.
Right. That doesn't accomplish that.
Right. Or have somebody come in and do 2 days of a workshop and not do any sort of follow-up and reinforcement. It requires everyday learning. And there are companies out there that do this. They have a commitment to saying, look, every day we set aside 20 minutes or 30 minutes where everybody in the whole company learns. Work doesn't get done at that point. We're learning. And they see global sales increases, employee retention goes up, employee development goes up, they can promote from within. I mean, there's all these incredible benefits that come from committing to learning. I think it can start with the individual taking responsibility for themselves first, to say, okay, if I'm not going to get that from a company, I'm going to do that myself. I've got this goal. Yep. I have this vision of myself. And I encourage people listening to do this and say, okay, and be very deliberate about this. Say, okay, where do I want to be in 5 years? We'll take 5 years as an example, though. Where do I want to be in 5 years? What do I want to be doing? What's my vision of myself at that point in time? And then say, okay, where am I today? And who am I today? And there's going to be a gap between those two. Well, in that gap is certain experiences and knowledge that need to be acquired in order to be that person that you have in your mind's eye that you can become. We have to be deliberate about acquiring that knowledge and acquiring those experiences. And I think that's the way people become the best version of themselves possible. And that's really it. Should be the goal for every professional in sales, is how do I achieve that?
Well, and I think the line that you said in there, Andy, that, I'm going to rephrase it, but, where personal growth ties to business growth, as you said, companies that set aside time for learning and are improving on an individual level, they're seeing results in their business. They're seeing the growth there. So I think that, whether you're in sales or any other functional role, that's great advice for both leaders and for individuals, to make sure that they're seeking that out, that they're finding an organization where, that sort of thing can be fostered, where personal development and learning are a priority, so that, they can contribute to the growth of their organization by means of their personal growth, because they do tie very closely together.
Well, one point I was just going to squeeze in real quickly. The sad fact is that most companies don't make that investment. So it is still up to the individual. I mean, sadly, I'd love to see companies do it. And so as an individual, if you're going to do it, it can't be, you really need to put it down on a piece of paper. It's a plan. My personal learning plan, my personal development plan, this is where I am. This is where I want to be. How do I span that gap? And put that down and make that something that you hold yourself accountable to every single day. Am I getting better? Maybe just 1% better, just a fraction better every day. And what do I have to do to make that investment, to make that happen?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. If you don't own it, then likelihood is no one else is going to, right?
Exactly.
I love it. Well, Andy, this has been a great conversation. I think you bring some great insights from, talking to salespeople and sales leaders over many, many episodes on your podcast. If anybody listening to this would like to follow along with you, stay connected with you, reach out and ask any follow-up questions, you're very tuned in to the sales community. So if anybody would like to reach out after this interview, what would be the best way for them to go about doing that?
Well, gosh, several ways. One is they can connect with me on LinkedIn. Every day there's like a new posting I post on LinkedIn, or 5 days a week, post on LinkedIn about something about sales. So it's usual LinkedIn preface / the Sales House. That's how you find me. You can do the old fashioned way. You can email me at andy@thesaleshouse.com. And come to thesaleshouse.com, learn a little bit about what we're doing there. Because we made the point earlier, is not to be completely self-serving, but it's a platform. It's all about education. It's not training. It's come spend 10 minutes a day. If you only have 10 minutes, come spend 10 minutes. We have a lot of things that you can learn in just 10 minutes you can put to use in your selling. And just say, how do I get 1% better every day? That compounds over a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. You'll be a lot smarter, a lot better, a lot more productive.
Absolutely. Those 1% every day, they definitely add up. Well, Andy, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for making some time for this interview and for being a guest on the show.
Well, Logan, thank you very much.
Digital marketing agencies have a tough job. You have to stay on top of the latest marketing strategies for your clients and your agency. What if there was a way you could address both at the same time? Imagine your agency putting out content with greater quality and quantity. Envision bringing your clients a turnkey solution for one of B2B marketing's fastest growing media strategies, podcasting. All those clients asking for your help with their account-based marketing efforts? Picture being the first to bring them the idea of content-based networking, showing them the proven strategy for breaking into their most coveted accounts. Here's the concept. Sweetfish Media is looking to work with a limited number of innovative agencies interested in a new partnership model. We produce a podcast for your agency at no cost. You introduce the power of podcasting and Sweetfish services to your clients. Everybody wins. Learn more at sweetfishpartners.com.